the Moron mess.
Because of the controversy, she told me yesterday that she didn't want to carry on with her duty.
The aide who made that comment about U.S. President Bush quits.
The National. From the Canadian Broadcasting Centre, here is Peter Mansbridge.
Good evening. The Prime Minister has lost one of his most ardent supporters, Francoise Ducros, his Director of Communications. Today, she fell victim to loose lips, a fatal slip of the tongue, her own. At a NATO meeting last week, Ducros was overheard calling U.S. President George Bush a moron. Jean Chrétien defended her. He even refused her first offer to resign. But the pressure kept building. And today, Chrétien changed his mind, accepting her resignation. Eric Sorensen has been watching this political drama play out. He joins us from our bureau in the nation's capital. Eric.
Peter, we've seen this kind of drama before. For example, with former Solicitor General Lawrence Macaulay. A former colleague of the Prime Minister, a close colleague, is under attack. The PM stands his ground, but only to a point. Behind the scenes, she was a trusted advisor to the Prime Minister and a close friend. Ferociously loyal, Francoise Ducros was someone Jean Chrétien wanted by his side. But she was conspicuously absent today when the Prime Minister walked out of cabinet.
So I'm very sorry. She was very good, very competent person, and served me and served the government extremely well.
Ducros first offered to resign last week at the NATO summit after making an offhand comment about President Bush. What a moron, she said in the presence of reporters. The Prime Minister defended her then.
None of the American officials mentioned that to anybody on our team. So if it is a crisis, I don't know where is a crisis.
Not a crisis, but a growing political embarrassment.
Personal loyalties ahead of U.S.
Madame, je m'excuse de vous interrompre. Vous êtes ici en France.
In France, President Chirac cut off questions about the moron comment. In Iraq, newspapers quoted Ducros, stating Bush has become the most hated person in the world who is given all sorts of bad names. And in the United States,
can we really trust the Canadians?
The talk shows were having a field day.
And that she offered to resign, and Prime Minister Chrétien refused to accept her invitation. Now who's the moron?
The behind-the-scenes advisor suddenly could not get off the front pages. So again, Ducros offered to resign, and this time she insisted. It is very apparent to me, she wrote the Prime Minister, that the controversy will make it impossible for me to do my job. I would therefore like to leave my position as Director of Communications immediately.
She was, in fact, planning to go back to the public service.
The Prime Minister said Ducros was getting ready to leave the job anyway. Her interim replacement, former CTV reporter Jim Munson, already in place. The opposition insisted the PM had one more piece of unfinished business.
But I wonder if he will now simply issue an apology to the President of the United States so we can put this matter behind us.
The Prime Minister suggested no apology necessary. Ducros was actually defending Bush.
That was a private discussion with a journalist. She was defending the President of the United States. And, you were not there.
We're dealing in these Canadians with the spoiled brats of the New World Order.
As for the critics on U.S. talk shows,
some said that they love Canadian, and some says they don't love us.
The PM joked he's never worried much what Americans think of him because at the end of the day,
because none of them vote for me. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.
They don't vote for him, but some Americans helped keep this controversy alive, and keeping it alive has cost the Prime Minister one of his most loyal advisors. Peter?
All right, Eric, thanks very much. Eric Sorensen reporting from Ottawa tonight. Well, our Parliamentary Bureau Chief, Keith Bogue, has also been watching all this. He joins us from the nation's capital. Keith, surely it wasn't Pat Buchanan who pushed the Prime Minister over on this one. What was the final straw on this story?
I think it was pretty simple. Francoise Ducros recognized that she could no longer do her job and that she had to go. This wasn't a huge deal in the United States. CNN didn't force her out of her job. The opposition didn't force her out of her job. Even calling Bush a moron wasn't the reason that she left. The reason that she left, even though the Prime Minister was standing behind her, was that she had reached the final disintegration in her relationship with reporters in the press gallery. She couldn't function anymore, couldn't do the job, recognized that, accepted it, and left.
Now, you know, some people call this a kind of inside the Queensway story. Does it really matter beyond Parliament Hill?
Well, I think it does matter to Canadians if they want to understand part of the texture of what's going on in this incredible story of the disintegration of the relationship between the former finance minister Paul Martin and the Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. There are a lot of people in this town who believe that Francoise Ducros played an important role in that, and that it has been an untold story, the role that she played in that. It's not that she's entirely to blame for what has happened, but understanding her role is going to be important to understanding the big picture of how things could have got to the bizarre state that we find them in today.
Well, no matter how one may feel about Francie Ducros, she was close to the Prime Minister. He relied on her advice. What happens now for him in this stretch run of his prime ministership?
Well, no question he has lost someone who he trusted, who he was loyal to, whose loyalty was returned, someone he liked very, very much. On the upside, given everything that we now know about the relationship with the press gallery, I think that it's become important to the Prime Minister to rebuild some bridges with reporters in this town, and he has an opportunity to do that with a new press secretary, Jim Munson, who's quite popular with reporters here. And that may give him an opportunity to do what some people think he needs to do, and that is reconnect with the Canadian people at the level of the ordinary guy they've known him to be.
Well, if Munson is the choice, it's an interesting one for Chrétien. The two of them are very similar in some ways, kind of the Street Fighter image. Munson was the one who actually went toe-to-toe, head-to-head with Pierre Trudeau those many years ago on Parliament Hill.
That's right. I knew you'd bring that up.
Keith Bogue joining us from our Parliamentary Bureau tonight. Well, today's resignation by Francoise Ducros is reason to convene our At Issue panel a few days early this week. Joining us from Ottawa to talk about the departure of the Prime Minister's Communications Director is Chantal Hébert, National Affairs writer with the Toronto Star, and here in Toronto, pollster Alan Gregg of the Strategic Council. Well, when you look at the events of the last couple of days, how do you assess how they were handled by the Prime Minister? Alan, why don't you start us on this?
Well, I'm going to do something that no one else is to actually defend him, and that I think above and beyond blind loyalty, I mean, he was trying to defend a principle, and that is that people in public life cannot have their careers absolutely destroyed by dint of making, you know, a modest indiscretion and being put to a test that no other profession anywhere in society is put to. Clearly, her comments were off the record. They were off the record because she is a spokesman for government. Unless she is a psychopath, she knows that the position of government was not that George Bush was a moron, and that she never anticipated that this would reach the light of day.
A modest indiscretion, Chantal, you see it that way?
Well, I'm not convinced that the Prime Minister or his former communications director would have forgiven that modest indiscretion if it had come from the press secretary of any of his cabinet ministers. And probably the Prime Minister would have had some very pointed questions to ask even one of his ministers if one had committed such a modest indiscretion. That being said, I sympathize with Alan's point of view about public figures and how much they're entitled to be able to say without ending up on the front page. But Francoise Ducros was in charge of overseeing the Prime Minister's image. And at the end of the day, having lived through this experience, whether it should have happened or not, once it became public, she was in no shape to do her job anymore or to do service to the Prime Minister. And moreover, all that it exposed about her relationship to the press gallery, and I happen to think that her bad relationship with the press gallery was part and parcel of how this story happened. The Prime Minister had to know that nobody who is in charge of a politician's or a political leader's image will survive something like that easily.
But isn't that a sad commentary in a way? I mean, I heard somebody else mention that the other day about how she had a difficult relationship with the parliamentary press gallery, including not only the press gallery, but some members of the Liberal Party. I mean, are we saying that if she got along well with reporters, this would never have happened?
I think, Peter, that we're saying that if you live by the sword, you perish by the sword. And Francoise Ducros yielded a big stick with the press gallery and with various ministers' office because she was so closely identified, so trusted by Jean Chrétien that she spoke for him. Not every communications director has all of that much leeway and power. But when she did speak, by the same token, it was seen as reflective of what's being said on issues in the Prime Minister's entourage. And that's been fine by her and by the Prime Minister so far. So you can understand that for someone who is by now probably the second most identified person to Jean Chrétien in his office, when you hear a comment like that about President Bush, and you know that the Bush-Chrétien relationship has been an issue, it becomes something that many would find newsworthy.
Alan, she said today or yesterday that this had made her job untenable, that she just couldn't carry on her job. I'm wondering if you agree with that. I mean, sure, there was a bit of reaction in the United States, not from the mainstream media, a couple of specialty channels on their sort of bombastic talk shows. But was the job, had it become untenable because of this?
Oh, absolutely. And the same thing kind of happened to Stockwell Day. Whether you agree with these people or don't agree with them, there was an issue of personality here. By her own admission, this was a difficult individual who had, rubbed a lot of members of the press gallery the wrong way, a lot of members of the Liberal caucus the wrong way. And this was their opportunity either to get even or to say, I told you so, this person should have been gone a long time ago. But there are, larger issues of principle that have been ignored by dint of the personality that's been involved here. Is that, right or wrong, and it was bad judgment, and no one disagrees with that. I mean, the fact of the matter is that there are many people in Canada who are seriously worried about what appears to be George Bush's increasing obsession with an attack on Iraq at the expense of dealing with any other foreign policy issues right now. And that has been completely obscured in the course of this particular kerfuffle. And she was at the point right now is that no one would let this go, which also, I think, is a testament of kind of, the facility of public discourse today.
Well, I found it interesting, Peter, that people like Paul Martin and Alan Rock, who surely wouldn't want every single utterance that they make in private reported on, were up in the fray in public, questioning the Prime Minister's communications director behavior. And I kind of wondered if they would have asked those questions in public if she hadn't been so closely linked to Chrétien.
What does this say for Jim Munson, who seems to be the person who will be taking the job, someone we all know as former CTV and CP wire reporter from years ago? What does it say for him in the kind of way he'll have to conduct the job, as which is obviously an important role, not just in terms of advising the Prime Minister, but in that relationship with the media? Chantal?
Well, at least he doesn't come to the job bearing the scars of the leadership battle that the Prime Minister has just had. Jean Chrétien is leaving. Jim Munson came to this game very late, so he hasn't fought those battles on Chrétien's behalf because he is perceived as someone from the outside. I think people's expectations that he's speaking on behalf of Chrétien will be diminished. They won't see him as much of a mouthpiece, and he is freshly out of the press gallery. So by and large, it could be that he might herald an easier relationship between the PMO for the remainder of the Chrétien tenure and the press gallery and various ministers' office.
Alan, any thoughts on this?
Well, he's in the gallery for 23 years. He's very well liked. He's a character, and that will serve him very, very well. But Theodore White, in the first chapter of Breach of Trust, talks about how you can never tell the press secretary everything. And the reason you can never tell the press secretary everything is if you tell the press secretary everything, they have to lie. The difficulty that Munson's going to have is the difficulty that anyone who comes out of the gallery, as opposed to a communications company or someone else, they were once colleagues with all the individuals they have to deal with. Their job now is to spin stories, often to defend what their former colleagues will deem to be the indefensible, and that will fracture and cause former relations to fray and be difficult, and that will be, the particular burden that he'll have to carry into this job.
Yeah, and the landscape is littered with the bodies of press secretaries who came out of the gallery whose relationships with their former colleagues.
It's a very tough transition.
But
Right.
at least there's not much competition for this job at this point.
No, there isn't. Quickly, any last thoughts on what all this says about the Prime Minister, Chantal, and I mean briefly?
It shows that the Prime Minister is losing his grip on power. He can't defend his own entourage. There's doubt as to whether this would have happened if he hadn't announced that he was resigning and was a spent force. You don't usually burn sources unless you think that you can dispose of them.
All right, let's leave it at that. Thank you both for coming in a couple of days early. Chantal Hébert in the nation's capital, Alan Gregg here in Toronto.